Welcome back. Recovering from a pandemic. Again, we are still going through the after effects now of the effects of COVID-19, but eventually things will go back to normal. So exactly how do we recover from all of that? I spoke with Fatima Van Houten. She is the program co-director at NewMexicoWomenorg, and she's talking about why our current health crisis needs a gender justice response and recovery plan. Right now we are joined by Fatima Van Houten. She is the program co-director at NewMexicoWomenorg. Fatima, great to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Definitely. For folks at home, let's explain a little bit about what NewMexicoWomenorg is.
Sure. So NewMexicoWomenorg is New Mexico's only statewide women's fund. So what that means is we do grant making to support organizations that serve women and girls statewide. We also do trainings and capacity building for folks across the state, looking at gender equity and racial justice. And then we also do research, which is sort of why I'm here today. And our mission is to advance opportunities for women and girls statewide so they can lead healthy, self-sufficient, and empowered lives.
How has COVID-19 affected the organization?
So it's a great question. We've been, quite fortunate. We've moved to remote work and we continue kind of doing what we do. And we really pivoted and started a gender equity emergency fund to support our grantees and other partners around the state to continue doing their work, because we've really seen the impacts specifically on rural communities and communities of color, tribal communities, and women around the state have been very profound. So we started this new fund, a gender equity emergency fund, and then we also did a research project that's really looking at what the gender equity response to COVID-19 is, but what the recovery should really look like for New Mexico.
There is a diverse makeup of different ethnicities here in New Mexico. Let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that NewMexicoWomenorg is now reaching out and helping out to those communities.
Sure. So as we've seen, the impacts of COVID-19 are really not equally shared across communities. So there are these pre-existing inequalities across particularly communities of color that have resulted in worse impacts of COVID-19 for Native American and Hispanic communities, worse than their white peers, and then specifically for women. So for NewMexicoWomenorg, our response is really rooted in addressing those pre-existing inequalities. And we're really framing this report, but also the longer-term response in the context of the current national and public health crisis of racism. So these two health crises are really inextricable. So it's really no coincidence that the two communities which have experienced the highest rates of police brutality and police violence, which is in the news, right now so much, are the same two communities that are worst impacted by COVID-19. And that's the Native American community here in New Mexico and the Black community nationally. So really the effects of COVID-19 are really determined by pre-existing inequalities. So for NewMexicoWomenorg, the response needs to be rooted in racial justice and gender equity, because that's really what's causing certain communities to be harder impacted by the pandemic.
And again, to recap once again, where can we find more information, Fatima?
So you can log on to our website, which is NewMexicoWomen.org, and you can download the report there. And we really encourage you to have a look at what the response could look like, a just response for New Mexico. And then you can also find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook if you look up NewMexicoWomen.org.
Fatima, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a lovely day.
You too. And again, for a full recap on that entire interview right there, we will have it for you later on this morning at always on KRQE.com.